everybody, and welcome to the Empowering Industry Podcast. I'm your host, Charli K. Matthews, and I am having a blast. Full day of recording, and I have the best way to start my day here with Kathy Nelson. Kathy, jump on here and tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Charli. I'm so excited to be here with you. So I am Kathy Nelson. I am a telecommunications engineer. I have an electrical engineering degree. I've been in the utility telecommunications industry for 31 years, which is honestly like really hard for me to say because it just makes me feel old. When I'm being nice, I will say I'm experienced, but sometimes it just makes me feel old. I spent 25 years working at an electric utility. And also during that time, I was on the board of an industry trade association, chaired that industry trade association from 2017 to 2018. And I do think that that's an important component because I was the first female chair in a 76-year-old trade association. Left my utility in 2018, went to a small radio manufacturer, worked there for a couple of years, then went to a consulting firm for 3 years, and then went out on my own just about a year ago. So I have my own consulting practice, and I'm really happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. So much there. We're going to dive into that in little pieces, but I am curious to why engineering? Why did you pick that path in the beginning?
So that's like a sort of an interesting story. So I wanted to be an architect from the time I was in third grade. And this is something that I think is really interesting that did not, obviously when I was in like second, third grade, didn't occur to me, but I was asked to attend this camp between second and third grade during the summer by my teacher who had put me to like an accelerated math program. So like math was something that I've loved like forever. Um, and I got to shadow a female architect for a week. And I'm like, this would have been like 1980. Like, what kind of program did this exist that there was something like that? And the fact that there was like a female architect in 1980 that I was shadowing. These things didn't like even occur to me as like being weird until probably like 5 years ago. And so I wanted to be an architect. And then that was like my whole plan. I took drafting classes in high school. And then when I went to college and got into the architecture program, there's a lot of art, and I was not very good at art. That's like a whole nother thing that I sometimes talk about too on my podcast, is that we learn things and we get pigeonholed into things that we and are told that we're good at one thing and not good at something else. And it really, I think, comes down to like practice and things like that. But anyway, realized that architecture was not for me, but I wanted to do something that involved math and science. My dad was a professor of engineering technology. My brother-in-law was an electrical engineer in the Air Force. And so math and science, engineering is generally what people who like math and science are kind of like told that they should do. And I'm like, I don't know what engineers do. I went to my brother-in-law's captain's ceremony at the Air Force. I was living with them for a summer, and they had donuts, and I'm like, oh, donuts, math and science. This seems like a place that I could live. And so I changed my major that summer to electrical engineering, really having no idea what that was. And that's one of the things. I also host a podcast, and we'll maybe we'll talk
Tell
about that.
everybody about the podcast.
But that's one of the things that I talk about on the podcast is like we don't know what these jobs are, right? Like, and I think that that's one of the things that I like to do on my podcast is like talk about what do you do as a like a day in your life look like. As an electrical engineer, there's probably 30,000 different jobs that we could have, and I want people to know what that is because I had no idea. I mean, I'm going to school to do something, and I had no idea what I was going to school to do. And I think that that's really common. And I think that that's one of the things that I like to share so that people, as they're thinking about what they want to do for a job or a career, they have some sort of idea of what that might look like. But
Also,
it feels
like,
very much like chance.
yeah, well, I was going to say, also, there's the people around us that influence us. I mean, it's just, I mean, of course, that architecture, she influenced you because she was a woman in the field. You were drawn to her, like, okay, I want to check this out because you can see yourself doing it. And then, your family is, in a field and absolutely pours into you and wants you to be successful. And this is what they know. And then of course, the classes and the people that the friends and everything that all influences you. I mean, I love my story. I wanted to be childhood development, and my mom's like, "Well, you're not gonna make any money in that." And I was like, "Oh, money, okay, finance. That sounds like money." And I'm like, "What am I doing in this class? Like, this is
Mhm,
not what inspires me, or is gonna make
mhm,
me feel like." It's so funny that I was in a sales job for so long when money is not the driving force for me. It is for some people, but it's not for me. So, Kathy, I get that. And then, I just think that that's the opportunity for all of us, right? That we can talk about all of these different career opportunities and show them in the power of social, of course, and getting out there. So, tell us a little bit more about why you started the podcast. I want people to kind of hear this, and it's so exciting about being able to share
mhm.
those stories.
Yeah, so I got furloughed during COVID, and like sort of at the beginning of COVID, I hadn't not worked since I was 15. I didn't know what to do with my time. I still had a couple of kids at home, but they were older, and um, I had been at a small conference where there was a speaker during lunch who had very like briefly talked about having a podcast. And this was a technical conference, and she's just said something about like keep in the back of your head like doing a podcast or something like that, which maybe like put a little tiny spark in the very back of my brain, but not something I really considered. And then I got furloughed, and I had at that time I was listening to Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast a lot. That was like my go-to podcast. And he talked a lot about women in Hollywood and the challenges that they had of going into being directors and producers and things like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this sounds like every story of every woman that I know in STEM. And the only person at least at that time that I felt that we heard from was Sheryl Sandberg. And I'm like, there's so many stories out there. And so my first two podcast episodes were my two engineering besties, Tammy and Carrie. And I was just like, let's just have a conversation. I'll record it. And then I sent it to people to see like, what do you think about this? And I got really good feedback. And so I kept going. And then it morphed into like people that people referred me to. And then it was people that would like send me messages of like, hey, I want to be on your podcast. So now the majority of my podcast is people I don't know. And it's amazing. Like I have had the opportunity to talk to the most amazing women that do absolutely incredible things that make me feel like I've accomplished nothing in my life. And and honestly, like there's two things that I love about this, like getting women's stories out, I think is super, super important. The education piece of like what people do for jobs is really important, and then making women feel like they have a community is really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be,
Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, like you're probably not the only woman in your company, but you might be the only woman in your department, the only woman in a meeting, the only woman at a table, and it can be really hard. And like I got an email maybe a year into doing my podcast from a woman that said, I was thinking about leaving engineering because I felt so alone until I found your podcast. If I just help like one person to stay in the field and not to feel alone, I feel like my podcast is successful. Like that's for
Absolutely.
me, like that's the most important thing. Also, the inspiration that I get from talking to these women is is also it's life
Needed.
giving. Like
Definitely.
I don't even know how to say it. Like it's like probably one of the biggest blessings that I've had in my life.
Well, so it's so funny because this is the Empowering Industry podcast, and we're talking about empowering women basically. So I have to tell the theme for empowering women this year is ignite inspiration, and it's important to know what inspires you, so that when you do need it, that you can go to that and pull from that, from the people around you, from the experiences, from the adventure of it all. And it's important because that's what feeds your soul, which then allows you to kind of give and do the work that you need to do. So I do want people to know a little bit more about what you do on your everyday. So you're out on your own and you've built this company. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so my company is KN Utility Telecom Consulting. which so the fairly self-explanatory in the name, hopefully. I do a lot of strategy, so helping utilities figure out what to do as their telecommunications networks age, as they reach end of life. There are new technologies now that allow utilities to build networks differently than they have in the past. And it's really providing the foundation for grid modernization. I mean, that's really, we think about all of the things we talk about smart grid. I know you're in pumps and water, and water like feeds into this too, right? Like all these things require communications, and our commercial networks don't necessarily work all the time, and we still want to have electricity when our um, commercial networks aren't working. And so being able to uh, help utilities figure out what to do and how to build these networks and what radio frequency spectrum to use, that's really a lot of what I do.
It's important because, I mean, we're going to be depending on those grids even more and more as
Mm-hmm.
energy shifts.
Yep.
And I'm very hopeful that we do figure out how to reuse water and use it and other materials for energy. And what is that going to look like as we connect that to the grid? I mean, there's a lot there. And I am not an engineer. But I do know the importance of sustainability and where we're going. And I think that that will take bright engineers and different ways of thinking that we haven't really thought of before. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about, having great minds like yours and the women that you're interviewing too, working on this. What have you know, learned, I guess is the best way, being in industry on that note, like when you talk about sustainability, what do you hope to see in your field? Like with the utilities? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's been talk about smart grid and grid modernization for probably 15 years. And I feel like we're infants at that stage. So getting to the point of having things implemented and to the point that those changes are actually being made, that's what I'm excited about, is actually getting to the point that we can see like the fruits of our labor, the fruits of our strategic thinking. I mean, that's a lot of what I'm doing is strategy, and seeing that actually get implemented and seeing the value that utilities can gain from making those investments and making those changes, that that excites me.
Yeah. And it's, I think that the digitalization of everything, I always tie it back to social media, which is kind of funny. But I know that that is not, I mean, I didn't create social media or platforms or anything like that. But I would go in to talk to people about that, and it'd be like during the headlights. And I just feel that when people are talking IoT or IIoT or, even AI and things like that, it's like, this is so far ahead of where we are. So what do we need to do? That it's been this progression, right? 10 years it took us talking about social media for people to kind of catch on and do it. And then we don't want that same thing to happen in industry, right? We want it to be faster than that. We want people to adopt it so that we can move forward. But I feel like that's still, I don't know if it's human nature. I don't know if it's like, okay, there's always going to be the early adopters, that come in. But what do people need? I guess, what do they need to know to get started? If they're looking to improve their facilities, what do they need to get started?
Um, so a plan. I mean, honestly, like that's what I think is really the most important thing, is really looking at where do you want to be. And when we talk utilities, we talk 20, 30 years out, right? So like you're looking at through this crystal ball of like, what do I want things to look like in 20 or 30 years? Figuring out what that plan is, getting buy-in from the business. So traditionally, telecommunications within a utility has been kind of siloed and not necessarily like front and center, which has been fine, right? Like that's fine. But being able to bring in what those business requirements are and being able to have those conversations with folks within your business so that you're getting everyone together to talk about what do we want this to look like, because you're planning a network that is not siloed and is not building individual networks for each use case, which is like traditionally how utilities have done telecommunications, and for very good reasons, um, and very necessary reasons, and very reasons that were kind of like required. Um, but it's changing. And so getting everyone together to talk about what do we want this to look like, and getting buy-in, educating the C-level suite, educating regulators, because telecommunications now has a visibility within the industry that it has not had before. So having that plan, um, I do a lot of advocacy for spectrum. So for wireless networks, you need spectrum in order to run these networks. We can't rely on, pulling up my cell phone here, you can't rely on communications, commercial communications for mission critical applications, because what do you do if it's not there? And so having access to spectrum is something that I'm very passionate about. And that gets into some of the things I did when I talked about like being on the trade association board of directors. That's one of the things that I did, was I did a lot of spectrum advocacy, um, and education. So that's really like getting started. And then it's digging into like the specifics of like what technology actually makes sense. And there's there's now opportunities to build private networks that are very similar to like what we use for our cell phones. Like that's a global technology. There's a lot of manufacturers. Previously, utilities have been required to have proprietary networks. So having a global standard is super, super important. So being involved and engaged in industry, um, making sure that we have access to spectrum to build these networks, and then figuring out specifically what does it look like for your specific utility, because every utility is different. We have 3,300 electric utilities. I come from the electric space. 3,300 electric utilities, 3,300 different ways of doing things. So what works for one utility is not going to necessarily be the right solution for another utility. So making sure that you are figuring out what works specifically for your utility.
Yeah, and I think anytime that you can set aside time to do strategic planning and bring somebody in, it's so important, because then whoever the leader is gets to sit in and become part of the team, which is so important for that. And just to be able to observe what's going on versus run the meeting, it's so
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. So I'd highly recommend that that we all do strategic planning that way, and just give yourself the day to, really actually think about the business and where the future holds. So, I think, Kathy, I could talk to you for days, you know that. And I love what you do. I love how you connect people, and that builds that trust. So, I think once okay, I'm I'm gonna use you as an example, Kathy, an engineer, a female engineer in industry, out there doing the work, and you love it, then you want to give the opportunity to others, and you don't want them to leave. And I think that the big challenge that we have, is that some people do leave, that they are in the wrong environment, whether it's like we were talking about earlier, they're the only female in the room, and they actually like girly stuff or having women's talk or whatever you want to call it. They don't feel like, okay, I'm all alone on this island. That's really important. And so we do that through empowering women. You do that through your communities that you're building as well. And I think that the more that we can say that we are successful engineers, doing the work out in the field, and we can be ourselves, whatever that looks like, makeup or not,
Mm-hmm.
sparkles or not, it doesn't matter. This is what we look like. This is us doing the job, right? So excited for everybody to get to know you, Kathy. I can't, of course, let you go without rapid fire. So tell everybody, what's your favorite book?
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's, see, you say rapid fire, that I'm like, shit, what is my favorite book?
Right, it's so hard.
Um, okay, I read a lot, and I don't know that I have a favorite book. So
Okay.
can I pass on that? But
Well, you gave us
I
your
love
podcast.
novels. I
Well,
love
tell us.
novels.
Okay, novels. Tell us your favorite podcast. You were mentioning. Well, you don't even have to say favorite.
Current, Currently it's Hard Things. So we
Okay.
can do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle, Abby Wambach, and Amanda Doyle, I think.
We can do hard things. And what is the best advice you've ever received?
Okay, I'm gonna give like my best work advice, because that's the first thing that came to my mind. So my hiring manager was the one who suggested I go into telecommunications as opposed to energy, because I actually have a power systems background from school. That was the best, that got me to where I am today, and I absolutely love what I do.
I
So
love
that
it.
was my best work advice.
Okay. Now, if you were going to tell a young professional coming into the industry, what advice would you give them?
Be yourself. Um, I came into the industry 31 years ago and I tried to be one of the guys because I felt very much like an outsider, which I didn't feel like at school, which is weird, but because there was not very many women in my university classes either. Be yourself. Like you talked about, be sparkly, wear makeup, don't wear makeup, whatever it is that you have, just be yourself and bring whatever you have, because that authenticity, that is what's valuable. It's you.
And I have to say, from earlier thinking about your architecture and the arts that are around that, I absolutely see the arts when I talk to you, and so those limiting beliefs around science and math and technology and not being associated with the arts. We couldn't market these things without the arts, right? And you're a fabulous marketer as well. So there's so much there that we can dive into, but I think that the big thing is, and we will dive into it later, Kathy, on a future podcast, is, you know, if we can be ourselves, then we're going to figure out these big questions, the things that we need to, whether it's critical equipment or it's just family life, we're going to figure those things out because we're going to be honest with each other. So, Kathy, you've had me on your podcast, which was amazing. One of my favorites, asking me all the right questions to tell my story. And so I'll put the links in the show notes for everybody to get in touch with you and to check out your podcasts. And anything you want to, I'll give you the last word, Kathy.
Well, I want to thank you, Charlie, and I want to say that I love the work that you do. I love empowering women. I love your empowering industry. Like, you do so much in the industry and so much good for women, not just in STEM, but also in trades. I mean, we didn't really talk about that, but women in trades, there's less of them than there are women in STEM, and super important. I love the work that you do. So I just want to thank you for that,
So
and the great
before I
work that
let
you
you
do.
off, sorry, this could go on and on. There is a book though, chapter in a book coming out. Tell us about that, where they can
Oh, yeah,
learn more
yeah.
about you.
Thank you. So there's a book coming out, Extraordinary Engineers. I think it's volume 2 coming out next week. So I have a chapter in that, where I get to like talk a little bit more about the things, like the reasons I went into engineering, how I got here, and um, it's the stories of a lot of women engineers, which is the basis of my podcast, and I think so important to get our stories out into the world, because um, we need that
It makes a difference.
representation.
You showed
It
us it
does.
makes a difference.
Yeah.
Just that
Yeah.
woman, being willing to go hang out with some third graders, like
So
amazing.
crazy. So crazy that there was something like that in 1980, right?
That's
Like,
right. That's right. It's and if you think that your story doesn't matter, then come talk to us because it so does, and we'll put you out there and prove it to you. So, I will make sure that everybody gets in touch with you, Kathy. And so until next time, be empowering.
thanks, Charlie.